And now, viewers, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to a great new children's ITV series. For the first time on television, the stories of Thomas the Tank Engine and friends. Take it away, boys.
Following 3 years in production, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends made its debut on the afternoon of October 9th, 1984. The show became a runaway success on children's ITV, attracting more than 8.5 million viewers. This first series consisted of 26 episodes, adapted from the first 8 Railway series books. The first televised series introduced the first 7 steam engines of the Fat Controllers Railway fleet, which were the core characters of Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, Percy, and Toby, alongside Annie and Clarabelle, Henrietta, Terence, Bertie, and of course, the ever mischievous Troublesome Trucks. All characters were brought to life on television and received critical acclaim to a much wider range of audience.
Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a big station on the Island of Sodor. He's a cheeky little engine with 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler, and a short stumpy dome.
The episodes were first broadcast every Tuesday afternoon, 2 episodes per show and compiled into a 10-minute block, featuring the nameboard sequence in between the episodes. A year later, in 1985, the episodes were shown individually during a 5-minute block. The final episode of Thomas Series 1 featured a brand new Railway series story written by Wilbert and George Awdry entitled Thomas's Christmas Party. Britt, Allcroft and David Mitton wished to end the series with a Christmas-themed episode, but per the contractual agreement, the story must be written by Awdry and the published work to be adapted for television. Britt and David drafted an outline for the story they were interested in telling. Awdry agreed and wrote the full story, which would be his first book since his retirement in 1972. During this time, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends was nominated by BAFTA in the short animation category alongside Danger Mouse, Rupert and the Frog Song, and the Wind in the Willows TV series. The winner was Rupert and the Frog Song. In spite of not winning the award, Thomas continued his success with expansive merchandising, including VHS tapes released by Guild Home Video, the Ertl die-cast range, Ladybird books, annual books, several postcards, Hornby models, and so much more. The creation of the series was very in-depth. Every item was carefully thought out, including the series title, which was initially called Thomas the Tank Engine in an early script. 2 further inscriptions and Friends were later added for the final title. According to Britt, she wanted Thomas as a central character of this series, as she stated, "There has to be a number 1, there has to be a hero." In order to create the intricate design of the Island of Sodor, attention to detail was critical. Thomas and 6 of his steam engine friends were all made in Gauge 1, using the components of Marklin for a basis of real-life locomotives, with extensively modified chassis, motor and wheels, just to obtain a sufficient size and level of reliability. It took 6 weeks for modelers to construct the new bodies of the engines, allowing the most accurate representation of the characters' book counterparts. Each engine had a full collection of interchangeable multiclave facial expressions made out of fitted resin castings. Beneath the molds, a pair of moving eyes would assist in reflecting the emotion or mood of the engine and was operated through radio controls. The engines were also linked to a pump and smoke unit to make the steam look as accurate as possible. The human characters, including the Fat Controller himself, were all designed by combining both solid lead and plastic scene for wide shots. For close-up scenes, some human models had to be made on a larger scale. The large-scale models would also be used if the stop-motion techniques used in the series required it, such as a driver that needed an arm that could be moved to represent waving. Most out of a wide range of rolling stock, including the troublesome trucks, were all scratch-built, using parts from the 10mm range of Gauge 1 accessories and fittings. The series was filmed at Clearwater's Warehouse Studio in Battersea, South London. The sets were constructed on a rostrum table, approximately 20 feet by 16 feet. Once a Pacific set's filming was complete, it was then dismantled and replaced by another set for further filming. Shot on 35mm film, the camera utilized a periscope system specially devised by director of photography Terry Permain. This enabled filming very close to rail level. Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell composed the soundtrack for the first series using a Roland Jupiter 6 synthesizer. This included all instrumental music, incidentals, and character themes like James, Gordon, Percy, Henry, and of course, Thomas the Tank Engine. The series received fantastic publicity and press in the media, including the headline, Thomas the TV Star. Subsequently, the railway series books that inspired the television show had sold more than 8 million copies for readers both old and new. Following the success of the first series, a second televised series was soon in production. This would be filmed at Shepperton Studios, which would become the home of Thomas until Series 12, the final series that utilized the models in 2008. Consisting of a further 26 episodes, Thomas Series 2 contained further adaptations of stories from the Railway Series books, including Edward the Blue Engine, Percy the Small Engine, Duck and the Diesel Engine, the Twin Engines, Branch Line Engines, Mainline Engines, and Tramway Engines. Other adaptations considered, but later abandoned, included Percy's Promise, Gordon Goes Foreign, and Double Header. Percy's Promise and Double Header would later be adapted for Thomas Series 3 in 1991.
Gordon was talking one day to one of these. "When I was young and green," he said, "I remember going to London. Do you know the place? The station's called King's Cross." "King's Cross?" snorted the engine. "London's Euston. Everybody knows that." "Rubbish," said Duck. "London's Paddington. I know. I worked there."
Another story abandoned was an abridged adaptation of the Donald and Douglas stories, Hollow Twins and the Missing Coach, based on the stories in the book, The Twin Engines. Unlike Gordon Goes Foreign, this episode was in production in 1985. According to David Mitton, halfway through filming, Britt decided to cancel the production due to a lack of action and a complicated storyline. The Missing Coach tells the story of Donald and Douglas's arrival on Sodor. The twins would ultimately cause confusion for everyone, including the Fat Controller. During the story, Douglas accidentally forgets to shunt Thomas's special coach. To avoid getting scolded, both him and Donald swapped their tenders.
"Here, gentlemen, are the facts. Number 10 has been shunting the yard. Your coach disappeared. We investigate. Number 10, disappears too. You can draw your conclusions. Please accept my apologies. The matter will be investigated. Good afternoon, gentlemen." The Fat Controller watched them till they climbed the station ramp. His shoulders twitched. He wiped his eyes. Douglas wondered if he was crying. He wasn't. He swung round suddenly. "Douglas," he rapped, "why are you masquerading with Donald's tender?"
To fill the gaps for these abandoned or unfinished storylines, Christopher Awdry was asked to write several new stories for this series. Due to the contract signed by Britt Allcroft, the stories must be in print form first prior to being recreated for television. The book of Christopher's stories was published the same year as more about Thomas the Tank Engine. Stories adapted for the second series included Thomas, Percy and the Coal, The Runaway, and Better Late Than Never. Christopher Awdry had also written two further stories for Britt and David to adapt, Thomas and Trevor, which was adapted from the annual story of the same name, and Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree, which was published separately. However, Christopher Awdry stated he was not particularly pleased with the result of the stories in the 30th Railway Series book due to the pressure to meet the deadline for the stories to be ready for filming. Toward the end of Brake Fan, where Douglas accidentally crushed the spiteful Brake Fan into pieces while trying to help James up the hill. His nameplate was clearly shown when they weren't supposed to, until after a follow-up episode, The Deputation, where the Fat Controller praised the twins for their splendid effort in clearing up the snow. You can see the comparison of the original and restored footage showing the differences, including a black sensor covering Douglas's nameplate, and some zoomed-in shots of him and Edward to keep it out of frame. One final noteworthy alteration during filming of Series 2 was a cameo appearance of Terence the Tractor in the episode Ghost Train. Originally, as shown in this published image, he was meant to pull a cart full of lime which Percy crashes into. While this scene was filmed, his role was cut from the final edit of the episode. The second series introduced more characters such as Duck, Donald and Douglas, Bill and Ben, Trevor, and Harold the Helicopter. It was also the first series to introduce the first set of diesel locomotives, including Devious Diesel, Daisy, and Boko.
We diesels don't need to learn, we know everything. We come to a yard and improve it. We are revolutionary.
The troublesome trucks also gained their recognizable molded faces, improving significantly from their first series look. The second series of Thomas premiered as a double bill, starting with Thomas, Percy and the Coal and Cows on Children's ITV on September 24, 1986. For home video releases in the late 80s, Pickwick Video, later renamed to Carlton Video, released 3 sets of videos containing the complete second series. Later, in 1991, they also released the best of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends on VHS. With the second series aired, Thomas's life on television is highly regarded as at its peak in quality, as it still is today. The following year, in 1987, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation bought the rights for the series to be transmitted on Australian television. Back in the UK, Thomas had been nominated by BAFTA for another award in the short animation category alongside Super Ted, Paddington Goes to School, Max Headroom's Giant Christmas Turkey, Danger Mouse, and The Wind in the Willows. And then the winner was...
Super Ted!
This would be the second nomination, and the second last for Thomas, but being nominated is a great honor as well. While Wilbert Awdry may have stepped down from writing any further Railway Series material, he continued to write and adapt further stories. After writing Thomas's Christmas Party a year earlier, Wilbert went on to adapt several of his older stories, including Thomas Comes to Breakfast in 1985 and Thomas and Gordon Off the Rails in 1990. Wilbert even wrote 2 annual books in 1979 and 1980, with illustrations by Edgar Hodges. He also contributed his writing to several chapters of the Birmingham and Gloucester Railway for author P.J. Long. Wilbert had been the president of the Dean Forest Railway Line since 1983. 4 years later, in 1987, a No. 60 Hunslet-Settle tank engine was named after the railway's president, going by the name of Wilbert. Meanwhile, Christopher Awdry continued writing more volumes for the railway series. While writing Gullane the high-speed engine, he was finally able to quit his job at the Inland Revenue after 20 years. This allowed Christopher to resume a full-time career as an author. During the same year, the book titled The Island of Sodor, Its People, History and Railways was written by Wilbert and his brother George Awdry and published by K.M. Ward through a limited run of printed copies. Unlike the usual railway series stories, this book served as an encyclopedia of the fictional island of Sodor, with a classic way of saying, it all happens here.
The Isle of Sodor was inspired actually by the Bishop of Sodor and Man. And the Reverend was over there visiting the Bishop, and he thought, you know, I need a place to put my characters. I'm being asked, where are they? Where is this story's based? And he think Sodor's pretty good. So he created this imaginary island that was positioned midway between the Isle of Man and mainland Britain.
Wilbert Awdry had this obsession to understand the island of Sodor, a place where all these engines could run, and they could run authentically, so that there was no sense in which these were fictional engines. They were engines which followed their own true railway logic. Sodor is a great crossword puzzle. It's bringing together all these disparate, unrelated ideas and making them part of a whole new mythology. And there aren't many people who have done that. J.R.R. Tolkien, in creating Middle-earth, created his own land, his own language, his own geography, his own sense of place in which to put his stories. Wilbert Awdry is one of the few other people who has done that.
My sister and I remember very clearly Father, on his day off from his parish work, would write, and he would bring to the tea table what he'd written, because it was important that these things should be read aloud as they were intended to be. And there was one occasion in particular where we had an input. It was the story of the race between Thomas and Bertie. We all felt that there was something not quite right. One of them had more hazards than the other. But Father proved that they hadn't by drawing us a map.
And he was a stickler for the accuracy of how a railway worked, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yes. All his stories, and my brother's afterwards, were based on anecdotes, documentaries, things reported that had actually happened on railways, so everything had to be correct.
As the railways of Sodor continued to evolve, an intricately detailed map of the island was developed in 1958. The map continues to be updated to this day. For both Wilbert and George, this map was much like a jigsaw puzzle, filling it in after years of correspondence and conversation between the two. The Island of Sodor book also provided answers to readers' questions, such as, why Sodor? Why did the railway choose the routes they did? Why have the places got such odd names? And so forth. Because of its limited release, the book had become increasingly challenging for fans to obtain. Second-hand websites sometimes have the book for sale for upwards of £1,500, but it could be a signed copy by both Wilbert and George themselves. The Awdrys described the island of Sodor as approximately 62 miles east to west and 51 miles north to south. It has many railway lines, including the North Western Railway, the Skarloey Railway, the Cody Fell Railway, and the Alsdale Railway. The North Western Railway has several routes on the island, with branch lines run by Thomas, Edward, and Duck. And the main line travels from Barrow westward to Tidmouth through the southern part of Sodor. Bigger engines like Gordon, James, Henry, Donald, Douglas, and Bear, known to readers as D7101, were all situated to run the line. There were two former controllers in charge of the railway, Sir Topham Hatt and Sir Charles Topham Hatt II. Their successor is Sir Stephen Topham Hatt. In the television series, he is just Sir Topham Hatt, the only controller who runs the North Western Railway. The Scarlowry Railway, both inspired by and based on the Tallyclyn Railway in northern Wales of Great Britain, is a narrow gauge line and the oldest railway on Sodor, currently owned by Sir Handel Brown II, the successor of his father. There were 3 controllers who ran the Scarlowry Railway: Mr. Mac, Mr. Peter Sam, and Mr. Roger Sam, son of the second controller. However, in the television series, the entire railway used to be run by the fat controller. From the 9th series onwards, Mr. Peregrine Percival runs the Scarlowry Railway, making him the second controller of the little railway. Mr. Percival is referred to as the Finn Controller, and unlike Topham, who rides in his blue car, Mr. Percival can be seen riding on his red bicycle. Both the Scarlowry Railway and nearly every engine, barring Duke and Mighty Mac, were based on their Tallyclyn Railway counterparts.
Tallyclyn, Dolgoch, Renias and I were built together in England. Who, asked Nancy, are Tallyclyn and Dolgoch? Tallyclyn is my twin. Dolgoch is Renias's. Their railway is at Towyn in Wales, and they're 100 too. They were green, and we were red. Tallyclyn and I had 4 wheels then, and no cab. We thought we were wonderful, and talked about how splendid we'd look, pulling coaches. What about trucks? Asked Nancy. Scarlowry chuckled. We had no use for them, he said.
The Scarlowry line operates from Crovan's Gate, one of the northwestern railway stations, and carries on to Crosney Curran, Glenelg, Rheneas, and terminates at Scarlowry, where the beautiful lakeside is located for sightseers. The lakeside at Scarlowry has a loop line extension opened by the Duke of Sodor in 1965. Not to be confused with a certain narrow gauge engine named after him though.
That would never suit his grace.
The Mid-Sodor Railway, another narrow gauge line, closed in January 1947 after over 60 years of service due to its decline. There were several engines, including Albert and Jim, that worked on this line alongside Duke, Stuart, and Falcon. Based on their lack of appearance in the series, readers assumed that they were either sold out or scrapped. Other than the railway's number 2 engine, Stanley, who was turned into a pumping engine due to his carelessness, the other engines never appeared in any of the railway series books, but were made on the model layout of the railway itself by Wilbert. After the railway's closure, Stuart and Falcon were sold off, while Duke was oiled and greased, then sheeted up and sheltered in a shed in Alsdale. Many years later, in 1969, Mr. Fergus Duncan, the controller of the small railway, and 2 clergymen found Duke. He was then transported by road and rail to the Scarlowry Railway, where he was reunited with his friends. While a majority of the Mid-Sodor Railway remained closed, some sections of the line were later rebuilt for the miniature gauge Alsdale Railway, which opened in the spring of 1967. In Alsdale, the station located at the northern end of town, that was tragically closed after the service with the Mid-Sodor Railway had ended 20 years earlier. Alsdale Road, a second station at the southern end of town to Alstead, is still currently in service by the Alsdale Railway. The line runs to Aldsborough West, a top station connecting with Duck and Oliver's line, the Little Western, with connections to Titmouth Sheds. The Alsdale Railway was co-owned by Mr. Fergus Duncan, the small controller, appointed by the other controllers, and his partner Sir Handel Brown. The Alsdale Railway was very well known for collecting supplies of ballast from the old mines of Duke's old line, which was used for replacing old ballast underneath the track on the Fat Controller's railway.
I can't understand, said Duck, why I've never heard about you before. The small engines all answered at once. We've only just come from our railway in England, which closed. Your fat controller asked us to come and fetch ballast for him, and he said he'd bring us plenty of passengers too. Haven't you had passengers before? Asked Duck. Only in England. It's our first season here. Oh, promised Duck. Then I'll bring you lots. Goodbye, goodbye. And he puffed excitedly away to see about it.
The one-third scale railway fleets were Mike, Rex, Britt, Blister 1 and 2, and Sigurd of Allsdale. Christopher Awdry's 1990 book, Jock the New Engine, introduced both Jock and Frank to the team. The engines were a popular attraction to holidaymakers throughout the summer on their passenger service. Other jobs included farm work, like transporting wool for making clothes.
Douglas and Duck came to look too. Douglas had just brought some empty ballast trucks along the branch line. He and Duck watched with interest as the new engine was put to his paces. "He puts me in mind of my days in Scotland," Douglas remarked. "Some of the engines up in the Highlands were yon colour. Jocks, we used to call them." "Jocks?" asked the new engine, stopping nearby. "Aye," agreed Douglas. "No bad name for yourself, I'm thinking, eh, Jock?" The small controller was delighted. "Well done, Douglas," he said, and turned to the new engine. "What do you think?" he asked. "It means you'd have to keep your colour too, to give the name some point. Would you mind?" "Not a bit, sir," said the new engine. "I like the colour, and the name would suit me fine." "Excellent," said the small controller. "That's settled then. Thank you, Douglas. A splendid idea." And Douglas puffed away, well satisfied with his morning's work.
Like the Scarlari and Mid-Sodor railways, Allsdale has its real-life counterpart in Cumbria, England, called the Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway, and all the Allsdale engines were based on their counterparts too. Finally, we have the Cody Fell Railway, the only wreck railway on the entire island. The line starts upwards from the village of Kirkmacan to the summit of Cody Fell and passes Devil's Back, or Drioni Digan in Sodric.
A mile below summit, the line runs along a rocky ridge. Always there is wind. Sometimes it is gentle, at others it is fierce and very dangerous. Then all passenger trains stop at Devil's Back station. But whatever the weather, stores trains and rescue trains must get through.
Mr. Walter Richards manages the line, but had a difficult time taking care of his 8 engines. Godred, one of the engines on the line, was unfortunately scrapped after a tragic accident, and his spare parts were used to mend the other engines. Although we're not completely sure if Coldy made the story up or not. The Coldy Fell Railway was featured in a book, Mountain Engines, and has only appeared one time in the series. According to Christopher, this was due to the stringent safety precautions and limited traffic of the Snowdon Mountain Railway in Wales, the real-life mountain railway line that inspired the stories of the Coldy Fell Railway. As the Sodor Railway is connected to the mainland, many visiting engines arrive to help the Vacan Trolley's engines with passenger and freight services, including Stebney, the city of Truro, Wilbert, and of course Flying Scotsman, who was Gordon's only surviving brother in the universe of Sodor.
The Fat Controller said he had all been honoured, and thanked Flying Scotsman and his owner for their help. "Please tell everyone," he went on, "that whatever happens elsewhere, steam will still be at work here. We shall be glad to welcome all who want to see and travel behind real engines." This announcement was greeted with cheers, and Flying Scotsman departed to the strains of "Will Ye No Come Back Again," led, as one might expect, by Donald and Douglas.
Additionally, there are many landmarks to explore on the island itself, including stations, quarries, harbours, castles, mountains, and so much more. There is an abundance of Sudrian landmarks existing all over Sodor. One of the prime examples is Brennum, a top station at the end of Edward's branch line, and one of Sodor's industrial harbours, where large ships come and go with passengers, cargo, and fish. Bill and Ben would regularly bring in china clay from the nearby workings, which will be shipped to the mainland once unloaded from the trucks. The vast landscapes and recreational opportunities proved the island of Sodor would be the perfect place for railway enthusiasts, sightseers, and holiday makers to take an ideal vacation. One of the greatest exports the island of Sodor has is its never-ending adventures. Children in the UK have grown to love these stories and episodes for nearly 50 years. Soon these exciting stories would reach far and wide and attract a massive audience from all over the world.